We are live. Welcome everyone to First Draft Friday. I am your host with Authors AI. My name is Alessandra Torre, and I am so excited to be joined today by James Rosone, who's going to talk to us all about creating series and what you need to keep in mind when you're writing books in a series. So this is not the first time that we've had James on. So welcome back. And do you want to tell the audience just a little bit about yourself?
Hi, good to be back with you guys and talk with you guys further about how to kind of master this craft and get better at what we all do for a living, writing books and telling stories. So, for those who don't know, I write two different genres. Crazy, I write military and techno thrillers, and then also on the science fiction side of the house. So, um, you know, I like writing both. I probably should have just stuck with one, but there comes a point in your writing career when you start hitting that 4, 5, 6 year mark. You're like, I want to try something new and different. And so I did, and I discovered I really like the sci-fi, but at the same point, I have a really big audience in the thriller I don't want to walk away from. And I enjoy it too. So how do you create a good book and grow both at the same time? Or generally speaking, it's the same concept, whether it's 2 genres, 3 genres. How do you create a good book and a good series and keep the readers coming back so you can continue doing this thing we love doing for the next 10 years, because you got to make money at this,
And making money at it. Absolutely. And so can you just walk us through how many series you have now and how many books are in each series?
So we have 2 active series that we're writing in right now, one thriller, one sci-fi. So we have our Rise of the Republic series. We're set to release book 8 at the end of the month. We have 2 more to go and then we're done. And then we have our Monroe Doctrine series, the thriller side. That's 6 books. The 7th one comes out in a couple of months. The 8th will come out in the summer, and then that will end that series. And so for a short period of time, I'm going to be focused on one series, which is going to be awesome. And then my hope is that I will largely kind of stay focused, where it'll be 3 books at a shot per series, or per genre is what I want to try to do. Because that way I give the readers a little shorter release cycle and more focus on that, and not this constant back and forth with 6-month delays between each book in each genre like that. It's hard for them. It's hard for me as a writer to go from a thriller to a sci-fi to a thriller to a sci-fi. It's quite challenging mindset wise and staying on track and focused on it.
So you're going to write like 3 books, a 3-book sprint kind of. You're going to write 3 books in one series, and then you're going to switch and write 3 books in the next.
It's probably what we're going to end up settling on, doing that going forward, I think, because it'll keep both genres alive and active and satisfy the readers best. And work-life balance on our end will be a little easier and better, because at the end of the day, the readers are like, I want the next book, because they just finished it. And you're like, I just slaved on this thing for 3 months and you finished it in, a day and a half. And yes, I know you want the next one, but I need a break.
Yeah, I understand that 100%. So with a typical series, how long does it take you to write each book? And then what is your normal release schedule? So how many, what is your normal release schedule?
It's been a little chaotic this last year. It's kind of an aberration last year, so we're not planning to do that again. We released 6 books last year. That was way too much, just too much work. A lot of time you're always working ahead, so to speak. So we're basically mid-February 2023. Most of what's coming out this year has already been pre-plotted and planned last year. And so it's really about working forward. And by the time we hit the summer months, I'm already working on what's going to get released in 2024. So there's always that forward-looking presence like that. It's kind of on the pacing and what you have going on. We're at this point trying to close out series and get things and make sure they close out strong, and then they set themselves up for the next series. Because when you've built this massive audience on your romance, thriller, paranormal, whatever it is you're writing, you want to carry that audience from one genre or for one series closure to the start of the new series. You've spent a lot of time and effort on growing that series and all those readers. You want to stay connected with those readers and pull them into the next one. And so that's, at the end of the day, this is a business. We want to keep doing this for 10 more years and not have to quit writing to go do another job. It means you need to make money at this business to keep it going. So you have to think strategically, how do I do that? And that comes down to the whole craft of storytelling in doing that. And, like we've talked about in the past, we use the Marlowe report to help with identifying the writer beats, making sure you stay consistent with that. one of the big pieces on that is how do you lay out the story? How do you lay out not just the series, but each story so they continually draw the reader in? You've got to keep pulling the readers in and keeping them excited and wanting to come back for more. It's that art of storytelling, basically.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So let's talk about, I'm a new author. Well, experienced new author, whatever. I have a brand new shiny series that I want to launch, and we're going to start with book 1. So when you're thinking about that and you're creating a new world and new cast, or maybe you're not, maybe this is a spinoff series, but what are you thinking about when you are sitting down? And it sounded like you said, I believe that you plot, you are a plotter.
Well, I'm a pantser plotter. I mean, I don't go into a series or a book with just a blank page and nothing. I also don't start a new book or new series with a 12-page outline either. I usually have I have an idea of where it starts. I have an idea of where it's going to end. I don't know how we connect though, and that's the pantser part of me, is the connecting piece. So quasi, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I get it. So when you are starting then, and you're talking about beats and that sort of thing, does that come into play as you're writing, and is that just an innate thing that you realize that something should be happening next, or do you have a normal framework you use?
So I didn't originally think like that. That's not what I was doing. The first 3 years I was in this business doing that. I discovered when we started using Marlowe reports and first started reading, when I first discovered the bestseller code, the book back in 2019, that we were inadvertently already doing some of that. Because when we would write a book, sometimes we would look at the chapters and lay them out and look at it and say, okay, well, where is it slow? Where's there needing to be more action? And that was really us unwittingly trying to engineer the beats the way they needed to be. Now we're a little more knowledgeable on understanding the science behind that and know more about what it is we were trying to actually do. Because I don't want to use the term like mind hacking, but our brains receive data a certain way, a certain manner. Like say some people learn auditory, visually, or physically doing things. When you understand how the people react to stories and basically creating books, you can create a book and a story and a series that caters to those. That's why some book series are wildly popular in audio narration, because the book is written in a format that's very conducive for audio, but it is a terrible ebook. It doesn't read as a good ebook, and the sales back that up. But the audio is just explosive and it's wildly popular. And others, using also as an example, okay, our books sell like hotcakes. We've sold just hundreds of thousands of copies of our ebooks, but our audio is not very good. Our audio sales are nowhere near comparison to what our ebook sales are. I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily because of the style and way we write them. We don't, if we're not writing them to audio, or perhaps it's because we've largely done a lot of the audio ourselves, where we're partnering with ACX, or we don't have access to a lot of the higher end name brand narrators. I just don't have access to, Mark Boyette, a bunch of these other big brand, narrators. So that could also be a factor too. But like you could say, back to your question, when you're talking about the setup of it, the big thing comes down to saying, when you have chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so chapter 1, how many scenes are in this chapter? And of these scenes, is each scene an action scene or a dialogue scene? So I'll take chapter 1, scene, whatever it is, and then I write whether it's dialogue or action, and then do that for each scene inside of each chapter. And I will do that for the whole book, more or less. And then from there, it's a matter of, okay, is this actually going to work? And then we start filling it in. So like right now with Monroe Doctrine 7 that I'm writing, I have the first 2 chapters filled in already. But the rest of the chapters, I have it say like chapter X and then 1 or 2 scenes, and it's annotated for action or dialogue, but I don't know what action or dialogue scene I'm going to put in there just yet. That's the pantser part of me, is saying what needs to be told in the story at this precise moment that's going to fit with the beats and what we know have to be engineered in there for this thing to succeed. Does that kind of make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So can you, for those of you, so 2 quick definitions for those of you who may be listening and might not know what we're talking about when we say certain things. So when James is referring to a Marlowe report is an artificial intelligence report. Marlowe is a technology that Authors AI, the host of this show, provides. So if you'd like to check out Marlowe is an AI who can read your manuscript and kind of lay out your story and show you where your beats are occurring in your story and where that plot line is. But beats is a concept that a lot of authors don't really understand. So is that something you can kind of dive into what you define as a beat?
Sure. And I'll be honest, I didn't know that myself for the first 3 years I was writing this either. Okay. So don't feel bad if you don't know it. You just don't know what you don't know. So the beats is basically looking and saying, is it a high or low, right? Is it positive, negative beat, so to speak? Are you pulling the readers in the moments, high and low moments? Because it's like an EKG, okay? When you go to the doctor and do EKG, your heart, they're looking at it, you got the beat up, down, right? And either it's super fast or it's kind of slow. Books are like that too. Books have their own kind of beats to them. And what you want to look at is how are you spacing them? How fast are they? Are they moving too quick, too low? How do you engineer that, so to speak? That's kind of how I guess how I define it. I know others have slightly more technical definitions of it. I am not an English major. Okay, I did not go to school for that.
Same here. Yeah.
They define it the way that works in my brain. It may not be the same way that Matt defines it as that, but he's a professor in English and I'm not. So that's how you have to look at it as an author. And when you can, because when you've been writing for a while, to get better and hit certain levels, to advance and just progress in your career, you need to start understanding the thing we call the craft, which is storytelling. How do you tell a better story? How do you draw readers in more? How do you keep them engaged and carry them with you from one book or one series to the next? And that's a learned skill. That's not typically something you're always born with, but it is something that you can get substantially better at over time when you start investing in what makes that work. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And we have a question from Facebook, and anyone watching, don't be shy if you have questions or
the dialogue versus action chapter is a good one too.
Opinions, then just shout out. But from Facebook, someone's asking, how do you define a dialogue and action chapter or scene?
Sure.
You had talked about, yeah.
So I'm going to revert to just what I write, so that's different for every person. So in the military techno thrillers, when I refer to the action stuff, is in my world, like right now we're deep in our series. Okay, we're book 7. We're coming up in the culmination of this big world war here, so we have to start wrapping up these final engagements that have to happen. So I know where geographically some of these final conflicts and battles have to take place. So for me, when it comes down to the action, it's like, okay, where are we at in the war? Where do these final battles need to happen? This is where an action is going to take place. So when I have decided I'm going to write an action scene, I need to figure out, well, what unit and group of characters have we been following that we want to insert here? Where were they at in the previous book or the previous scene? What was going on and where did they leave off? So we can now pick it up and resume it and carry them forward into the next spot. Versus dialogue, the dialogue can also be them in this conflict in this area. It's just maybe it's the staging, the prepping for the battle that's going to happen, as opposed to the actual action of it happening. So that's how I kind of delineate the two, whether it's action or dialogue. For me, I like to use a lot of the dialogue to either set up action or to kind of go over what just happened, if that makes sense. And that helps me bridge from what happened in this action scene to both recap it, but then lay out the course of what's going to happen next. And it gives me the next setup for the next action scene. And it's like it just rolls really well together like that.
So does dialogue literally mean that this is a lot of conversations, or dialogue doesn't necessarily mean dialogue in terms of conversations between people? It could be narrative.
It could be both. Yeah, it could be a narrative. I usually will mix in some narrative and then some actual physical dialogue conversations between the books. I probably have around 40% dialogue in most of my books. I think that's probably on the higher side for most authors. And that's because there's a lot of interactions and engagements going on between the characters. Most of the dialogue is ironically actually in the action scenes. When they're advancing on an enemy position, or they're doing these different fights where they're calling out to each other. They're shouting this, they're shouting that, they're doing this, and that's dialogue. Fast-paced dialogue.
David from YouTube said, is your war, when you mention a war, is it a traditional war using armies and commanders?
Yes. So, and it's a good point, because sometimes you could be talking about, literal, a literal war. You're talking about in, different contexts of, here's our business strategy, how we're going to take down this, this company or this business venture. It depends on the story and what genre you write in. So for me, it's just, that's what I write in. So that's typically what I tend to be talking about. There's other people who do the Secret Squirrel Spy type books, and it's more about going after organizations and entities and rogue agents and people like that. So philosophical type stuff,
Perfect. Okay, so and when you're talking about action chapters, is it normally like a physical confrontation between two, or an action chapter could be the group is moving, from one location to another, and it's like there is action occurring that is progressive?
Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's the action of what's going to happen in this meeting too. When say one of the intelligence agencies has uncovered that there's been right inside the government, when there's wars going on, there's always competing interests. There's interest group for this one and this one. And obviously your foe is also trying to subvert and cause influence of your actions too. So the agencies are always watching that kind of stuff. And it makes for a really good story when you can have a person who has been, is supporting the war or the action, but they're doing it for financial gain or for an ulterior motive, not necessarily from the patriotic sense. Or they're not doing it to subvert to help the enemy. They're doing it because it hurts their political opponent. It sets them up better for the next election. Kind of like that. So you can have some really cool, clever scenes where it's going to be, a meeting at the National Security Council where some of this is disclosed. And now you're going to actually go and confront the government official or the general who's involved in this activity and try to figure out what are you going to do. And it can kind of create those good suspenseful moments where, oh, I get it. That's why the author was going down this particular line with this arc of the story, because they just introduced this and it all makes sense now. It's unraveling the onion, so to speak. I like to reckon stories are like onions, and if you're a really good storyteller, you're gonna have a lot of layers to it. But a lot of layers, which makes a great story, also requires multiple books in a series or one really, really big monster book. I mean, most of us writers don't like to write these 300,000 word
monster books. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're great to write a 300,000 word opus.
5 books that make more money on. Yeah. And have a break in between. Okay, so when you're looking at a series, and you're going from one book to another book, are your books, could they be read as a standalone? Do you have one or several threads that are going through all of them? And then is there a conclusion? Is there a cliffhanger? How does
I would never encourage reading them like middle series like that, because you're just jumping into the middle of a war. And typically you want to kind of find out, well, how did we get there? At least I like to know, well, how did we walk into this thing and what's going on? I've had some readers tell me that they jumped in midway and then would go back and reread to get caught up. You can do that. Personally, I don't write that way, though. I tend to, when I get towards the end of the book, I usually conclude what was going to happen in that particular book. And then the last chapter or two is really the lead up to pull you into the next book and what's going to go on next. So because we write these big World War type things, each book usually is covering one kind of geographical area of what's going on. And as that draws down in conclusion, we roll into the next section where it's going to go next, or the next phase of the conflict, so to speak, as it escalates up. And then it goes up, and then it has its natural conclusion, just like a project, when you do project management, you have your start, and then you scale up, and then eventually you end because the project ends. And what we write, because the conflict is going to come to an end, that's how it works. You have your scale up, it happens, and then it scales down and it ends. And so the trick, though, is as a writer, and I've made this horrible mistake when I was early on, is we had our first series, started out with our Red Storm series, Battlefield Ukraine, go figure, called that 6 years ago. And so that was a great series. It was a 6-book series. And then I really screwed up everything and did not properly set up the next series at the end of that to have the pre-order ready. So when readers who've been following with the series for 18 months had something to go into next. That was my biggest mistake as a new writer, is I did not set that up right. And because of that, I had this huge audience and they didn't have a new book or new series to jump into of mine. And that was a really, really bad mistake as a new writer. Hurt. We overcame it, but I'm not going to lie and say it was easy. And it almost caused us to actually have to go back and get real jobs again. And so we learned from that and we don't make that mistake again. And as I'm winding down my existing series right now, I'm already thinking, well, what's next and when will it come out, so I can ensure that I don't make that same mistake twice. Yeah, there's some things you make mistakes in business, and sometimes you learn from them and you grow and you get better because of it. And sometimes you make them again and again until you will learn, or you don't, you go out of business.
Let me give you this next one. Here's the next question. And I just have to step away just one moment. So, but go ahead and dive into this.
Yeah, so character arcs that's an interesting one too. And so in mine, I'm kind of a weird author in that I tend to write books, or my series tend to be more plot or scenario driven series in books than they are a specific character. So we have specific characters that you're going to follow through the series. And then we have a host of smaller supporting characters that are essentially you follow and see. Basically, they're showing you what's going on in the plot. So in our Monroe Doctrine series, we have our national security advisor who's crossing over from one administration into a brand new administration from the opposite party. But the war had started at the end of one administration, so he stayed with, he crossed over to kind of help keep that continuity. So he's a consistent character that we're seeing evolve and grow and develop through the series and through the just the years of the conflict. So you see him grow as a character, as a person. And then below that, we have a string of characters that we're following in specific military units or aviation units. And we're watching and following them through the conflict as it plays out. So in our series, the Monroe Doctrine, it initially starts in the Caribbean and in Central and South America. But that's not where it ends. It ends further over in Asia because that's where the conflict was driven from, to our shores. And now we're following it back to their shores. And so what we're doing is we're following the characters inside those units as they go from one battlefield basically onto the next, onto the next, onto the next. So in the HBO series Band of Brothers, what was really phenomenally well done about Band of Brothers and following Easy Company was you followed this company and these characters through the battles that took place from the Normandy invasion all the way through to the end of the war. And you got to see how they grew, how they grew as people, rose through the ranks through attrition, and then the culmination of the conflict. And in contrast, you had the Pacific. Same concept and idea. They tried to portray and follow it in the Pacific War with some of the Marines and a few other characters there. Why that one did not succeed to the level that the Band of Brothers did was because we weren't following we didn't follow a specific unit in this case. We followed a couple of characters who were in a unit and then bounced around. Bestselling, Jimmy Bestselling is a great one, right? Great character. But he was in multiple different units during World War II. And so we didn't follow the same template that was the success of Band of Brothers in the Pacific, because we were following characters in the Pacific as opposed to the unit like they did in Band of Brothers. And that was a big compare and contrast. So in our series, we're following the units and characters with it as opposed to breaking it up. And I think that that's been a formula that's proven to be pretty successful thus far. That's kind of how we address the big arc, the small arcs, and the characters, and how you make sure that they're all moving along and support each other. Oh, you're still muted, Allie.
Oh, thank you so much. And if anybody has any other questions, please don't be shy. We only have a few minutes left. So this is your opportunity to shout out. And
the biggest challenge you have as an author for any of you new authors is when you're creating your series, okay, your first opening chapter has got to be the grab chapter that pulls them in. And if it's a weak chapter, it's going to be hard. You can get away with a weak opening chapter when you're in books 4, 5, and 6. Okay, you can't do that in the first book. That's absolutely no. So you got to pull them in like that. And then towards the end of each paragraph, like at the end of chapter 1, the last couple of paragraphs have got to be pretty compelling to both close out that chapter or cause a justification to turn the page to go to the next chapter. And then again, you got to repeat that cycle at the beginning where you pull them in, and then at the end of the chapter, drag them into the next one. And it's the same thing when the book ends, right? You got to give them a compelling reason to pre-order the next book or to stick with the series. And I'm telling you, the deeper, you're going to find is book 1 is really easy to write compared to book 7. The deeper the series gets, the harder the book is to write, because every book has got to be substantially better than the previous one. I mean, it's got to be really good, because now you're asking them to follow you into book 8 and 9 and 10. And, if you're, depend on your price point and things like that, they have an expectation. If you're going to, as a self-published writer, brand yourself like a trad pub writer and charge $8 or $10 or $12 a book, you better be delivering that level of quality or greater, and storytelling and everything else, or you're not going to succeed with that. Your series is going to fall off. And you can see that with authors who do that, who lose that interest in whatnot, because you'll look at the review counts, right? So you'll see a 12-book series or 15-book series. Book 1's got 10,000 reviews and stays really strong by through to like book 5. Something happened in book 6, and it went from having 7,000 to 8,000 reviews pretty consistently down to like 1,000 or 2. Something majorly happened between the connection between the end of book 5 and into book 6 that you lost the audience. And that's, as a writer, something you should look at and say, what happened? Do I see it? Is this something I can avoid? And am I currently making this mistake?
And we have less than 2 minutes left. We have 2 questions. So let's see if we can maybe just...
That's a good question. Why cut a series short at book 7 or 8 if it's really good? You want to keep it going?
Yeah.
Well, here's a question. It's really good in the eyes and perception of the reader. Is it really good in the eyes and perception of the author who has to continue it, though? And sometimes financially it's not. And you just have to make the decision that you have to cut it, or honestly, you just get tired and you just want to move on to a new series, a new idea that you just want to go on to. One of my good friends, Jay Allen, wrote Blood on the Stars. It's like got up to book 20. It's like by the time he hit book 12, I was like wanting to end the series. And it was so wildly popular, he really couldn't. Craig Allison had the same problem with X4. He wanted to end that series like 4 or 5 books earlier. And Podium was like, "Oh, we got to keep this thing going." And R.C. Brace got this thing. And so they dragged the thing out. But you want to end that way earlier than that. A lot of writers get into that rut where you want to end and you really kind of can't. But at some point, you do got to kind of cut it. You got to cut it at some point.
And from Facebook, and with regard to continue,
I know, right?
Continue. I can't say that word.
I know, James talking about. I read that from all the time. It's so hard. So you got this at the end of. There's always at the end of the book you have your appendix, right? A lot of times readers are lazy. It's like, dude, I put the appendix there. Do I need to? Maybe I need to hyperlink some of the stuff inside there for the ebook where they can go back and forth. I'm talking about that with my wife. It's an enormous amount of work to do that. We may have to go and do that. But yeah, you're right. That some of that stuff would be more helpful. Maps are great. Maps are unfortunately hard to do because Amazon charges you on the file size. So what we have been doing is putting the link at the beginning of the start of our new books that takes you off an Amazon site to where you can actually see the battle maps for that book. and we're going to try and see if we can make that work as a workaround to the file size problem.
All right. Well, that is a wrap. Thank you so much, James. It was fantastic to have you here. And thank you to everyone for your great questions. You guys are a great audience, and we will see you back in 2 weeks for another